It was a quiet morning when the phone call came. Arthur Walker, a senior engineer at Harrow Systems, an established company once hailed as a leader in the tech industry, paced around his small, dimly lit office. His mind swirled with complex calculations and the weight of the company's looming demise. The once thriving corporation was now on the verge of bankruptcy, its future hanging by a thread. For weeks, the air in the company had been thick with tension. The board meetings, the endless discussions about budgets, the failed attempts to reignite profits, all of it was beginning to feel like a slow-motion disaster. And Arthur, the humble yet brilliant engineer, watched as his colleagues around him, the same people who had once looked to him for guidance, now avoided him. Why? Because Arthur had always been the quiet one, the behind-the-scenes genius whose contributions were often overshadowed by the flashy, loud voices in the room. He didn't seek attention. His mind was preoccupied with systems, designs, and innovation. But as the company bled money, the room was filled with ambitious leaders pushing their own solutions, none of which worked. Then came the call that would change everything. It was from Daniel Carlson, the CEO of Harrow Systems, a man whose reputation for arrogance and cutthroat ambition was well known throughout the industry. Daniel had always dismissed Arthur as just an engineer, someone who couldn't possibly grasp the broader vision of the company. But with the company's future on the line, desperate times called for desperate measures. Arthur, Daniel's voice crackled through the receiver, I need you to come up with something. Anything. The board is ready to pull the plug. Arthur's heart sank, but it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was from the weight of the situation, a challenge he knew all too well. I've been working on something, Arthur said calmly, as if the fate of the company wasn't hanging in the balance. But it's unconventional. Daniel scoffed. We don't have time for experiments, Arthur. Just bring me a solution. Arthur remained silent for a moment, staring at his desk filled with scribbled calculations, forgotten blueprints, and half-baked ideas. Something stirred in him, something deeper than his usual hesitation. This could be his moment, his chance to prove that his ideas weren't just theoretical. They could save the company, if only someone would listen. Arthur's solution wasn't ready for the spotlight, not yet. But as he walked into the conference room for the next board meeting, he could feel the judgment in the air. The usual faces were there. Daniel, his right-hand man Tony Marshall, the CFO Eleanor Bright, and the others. All of them seemed anxious, desperate. The weight of a failing empire was suffocating them. The moment Arthur entered, Tony gave him a look, one filled with condescension. He wasn't the only one who underestimated Arthur, but his opinion mattered most in this meeting. All right, Arthur, Daniel said, cutting to the chase. We need results. What have you got for us? Arthur took a deep breath and placed a set of papers on the table. He could feel the skepticism in the room, but he remained unfazed. His presentation wasn't just a proposal, it was a chance to reshape everything. I believe I have a solution, Arthur began. It's going to take some bold steps, but it will stabilize the company, reduce waste, and increase efficiency by 40%. We can cut down on excess manufacturing costs and use automation to streamline the workflow. This can potentially increase our profit margins by a staggering amount. The room fell silent. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You're proposing automation? Tony scoffed. We've already tried that before. Failed miserably. You think you can fix it, Arthur? You don't even understand the broader picture. This company needs a radical change in direction, not some small-time fixes. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained calm. This isn't a fix. It's a foundation for long-term sustainability. But before he could finish, Eleanor interrupted. The board has already made decisions about the future of this company. What you're talking about is risky, unproven. It's not the kind of move we need right now. Arthur bit his lip, the frustration building in his chest. He knew what they needed. But all they saw was a simple engineer, a faceless cog in the machine. Look, Daniel finally said, I don't have time for half-baked ideas. We need something tangible. Something we can implement now. Give me a week, Arthur said, almost on instinct. Let me show you. If it doesn't work, I'll step aside. But if it does. Daniel's eyes narrowed, a mix of disbelief and disdain crossing his face. We'll see, he said, waving him off. You've got your week, Arthur. Don't waste it. Arthur went back to his small office, the room now feeling heavier, suffocating. For a moment, he let the weight of the challenge settle in. There was no turning back now. His mind went into overdrive, pulling together the ideas he had been nurturing for years, ideas that he had been afraid to present. But now, with everything on the line, there was no room for fear. He started redesigning the entire system, focusing on the automation that the company had failed to implement years ago. But this time, he had an angle no one had thought of, integrating cutting-edge artificial intelligence with a decentralized, modular design. This would not only streamline processes but allow the company to scale more efficiently and with greater precision. 4 days, Arthur pored over every detail, refusing to rest, ignoring the dismissive murmurs of his colleagues. He knew that the clock was ticking, but the passion in his chest burned brighter than ever. As the days passed, Daniel's doubts grew. He had seen Arthur's quiet demeanor in the past and had dismissed him as too meek to take the lead on any real solutions. But now, as he watched from afar, he could see something in Arthur, an urgency, a desperation, and an unmistakable determination. On the 6th day, Arthur was ready. He had a prototype. He called Daniel into his office. Arthur, you better have something worth showing, Daniel muttered as he walked in. Without a word, Arthur fired up the system. On the screen, the automated process came to life, calculating the company's potential savings and increased output. Daniel watched, silent, as the numbers and graphs shifted on the screen. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. This is possible? Daniel finally asked, his tone different now, unsure, but intrigued. Arthur nodded. We can make it work. Daniel stared at the screen for a moment before looking back at Arthur. His face was unreadable. I'll take this to the board. But you better be right, he said, his voice now tinged with a hint of respect. But little did Arthur know, there was something more at play than just boardroom politics. Something far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. As Arthur watched Daniel leave, he felt a strange sense of unease creeping up his spine. There was something in Daniel's eyes that unsettled him, an unreadable expression, almost too calm for someone facing their company's impending bankruptcy. What Arthur didn't know was that Daniel had already been in talks with an outside investor. A major corporation with the power to buy out Harrow Systems, and with it, the chance to dismantle everything Arthur had worked for. The plan wasn't just to save the company, it was to take it over, bury the truth, and use it for their own gain. Arthur had no idea that his brilliant innovation was about to be the very thing that would set off a chain of events that would challenge everything he had ever believed about loyalty, power, and success. Arthur Walker sat at his desk, the weight of his achievement sinking in, but a creeping sense of unease gnawed at him. The prototype had worked, it had exceeded even his own expectations. The new automation system, integrated with advanced AI, had the potential to change everything for Harrow Systems. But as he gazed at the screen, a chill swept through him. Daniel's response had been colder than expected. And now, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had been in the company long enough to understand the politics of the game, and he knew that things didn't always work out as they seemed. But even as he packed up his things for the evening, ready to present his breakthrough to the board tomorrow, he felt a knot in his stomach. What if Daniel was just pretending to be interested in the idea? What if there was something bigger happening behind the scenes? Arthur shook the thought away and left for home, trying to focus on the solution he had created, a solution that could save the company. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the boardroom early. The table was set. The tension in the room was palpable. He could see it on their faces. The engineers, the financial analysts, the executives, they were all there. But the most intimidating figure in the room was, of course, Daniel Carlson, the CEO. Arthur had spent years working for this company, building things no one else could, only to be overlooked. But now was his moment. Daniel arrived late, as usual, with a smug expression that Arthur couldn't quite decipher. As he entered, he didn't even acknowledge Arthur, his eyes fixed on the large presentation screen where Arthur's automation system would be displayed for the first time to the board. "Let's get this over with," Daniel said, not even glancing at the engineer. His arrogance was on full display. Arthur felt the coldness in the air but remained composed. This was his moment, and he couldn't let Daniel's dismissiveness throw him off. He began his presentation, confidently showing the results of his calculations and how the new system could cut manufacturing costs by 40%, drastically improve output, and even create new revenue streams through the implementation of AI-driven insights. As the numbers flashed across the screen, Arthur saw some of the executives nodding, impressed with the figures. But Daniel remained silent, leaning back in his chair with a bored expression. "Let's skip the technicalities, Arthur," he said. "Just get to the part where you tell us how this makes us money. We need results, not a lecture." Arthur's hands clenched into fists, but he held his composure. He had spent sleepless nights perfecting the design. Yet here was Daniel, dismissing it without a second thought. The board remained silent as Arthur explained how the system could free up capital to invest in other ventures, allow the company to become a leader in the industry again. But the skepticism was evident. Everyone was looking at Daniel, as if they were waiting for him to make the decision. And then, without warning, Daniel stood up. "I've heard enough," he said, cutting through the tension. "This company doesn't need more ideas that will take years to implement. What we need is a complete overhaul, and we're getting it from someone who knows how to make things happen." Arthur's heart sank as Daniel turned to the board, ignoring him completely. "I've been in talks with a major investor. We're looking at selling off parts of the company to cut our losses and restructure. This system?" Daniel said, pointing at the screen with a dismissive wave. "It's not a solution. It's a distraction." Arthur couldn't believe what he was hearing. His stomach twisted as Daniel's words echoed in his ears. The board members looked at each other, their doubts creeping in. It was a familiar game, the rich CEO, the manipulative player who'd been pretending to listen. "Arthur, thank you for your effort," Daniel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But this isn't going to work. You've got to learn that sometimes, the company needs bold action, not, whatever this is." The meeting ended quickly, and as Arthur walked out of the boardroom, he felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. This was the moment he'd worked for, and it had been ripped away from him, not by failure, but by betrayal. As he packed his things, Arthur heard hushed voices in the hallway. They were talking about the future of the company, and from what he could gather, they were discussing selling the company off. But to who? To what kind of investors? It was then that Arthur's worst fear came true. He overheard Tony Marshall, the right-hand man to Daniel, speaking on the phone. "Yes, the deal is almost done," Tony said. "They're going to love the numbers. The investors will take over everything. Harrow will be there soon." Arthur froze in his tracks, a cold sweat forming on his brow. He had been right. Daniel wasn't trying to save the company, he was trying to sell it off to the highest bidder. The system Arthur had worked tirelessly on wasn't a distraction, it was the only chance the company had at survival. And now, Daniel was going to let it all slip away. Arthur's hands trembled as he sat in his office that night, his thoughts racing. He had been played. His ideas had been dismissed, his contributions ignored. But he couldn't let this go. He couldn't let Daniel, a man who had taken credit for others' work and destroyed what he had built, ruin everything. Arthur wasn't going to be just another engineer, he was going to be the one who saved Harrow Systems. But how? Arthur started going through every piece of data, every detail of the company's finances, the automation system, the upcoming sale. That's when it hit him, there was a way to turn the tables, a way to expose Daniel's scheme and save the company at the same time. Arthur didn't need the company to listen to him. He just needed to be one step ahead. Arthur's plan began to take shape, but it wasn't just about the system anymore. It was about the investors Daniel was courting, the ones who were ready to take over Harrow Systems. They needed to know the truth, and Arthur knew exactly how to expose the deal for what it was. He spent the next few days digging through financial records, legal documents, and corporate contracts, carefully piecing together a web of connections that Daniel had been hiding. What Arthur uncovered was far more sinister than he could have imagined. Daniel had been inflating the company's value to make the sale seem like a lifeline, hiding the massive debt the company was in, and covering up the fact that they were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Arthur had what he needed. He had the leverage to destroy Daniel's deal and expose him for what he truly was, a fraud. It all came to a head when Arthur presented the evidence to the board. He had them cornered, and this time, Daniel's words couldn't shield him. He had set the trap, and now the tables were turning. "Daniel," Arthur said, standing before the board, his voice steady, "I have proof of everything. The inflated numbers, the hidden debts, the lies you've been telling investors. You've been selling us out, and I won't let you get away with it." Daniel's face turned pale as he tried to regain control of the room. "This is absurd," he shouted, his usual confidence shattered. "You're delusional." But Arthur was ready. He had already sent the evidence to the investors, to the press, to anyone who would listen. And soon, the truth would come out. The board members sat in stunned silence as Arthur handed them the evidence. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Daniel could no longer hide behind his charm and manipulation. Just as Arthur felt the rush of victory, the doors to the boardroom burst open. A new figure stepped in, someone none of them had expected. A shadowy figure from one of the investment firms Daniel had been courting, someone far more powerful than Daniel ever was. "Arthur," the man said, his voice calm and measured, "you've done well to expose Daniel's little game. But I'm afraid you've underestimated the bigger picture." Arthur's heart raced as he realized that the battle was far from over. The truth had finally been revealed. Arthur Walker had given the board irrefutable evidence of Daniel Carlson's manipulation, the falsified numbers, the fraudulent deals, the cover-ups. Yet, as the pieces fell into place, one chilling thought lingered in his mind. Was this all there was to it? He had exposed Daniel, but there was still one lingering question that gnawed at him. Had he underestimated the true danger? The room had gone quiet when Arthur laid out the evidence. Daniel stood frozen, his arrogance shattered, but the board members' eyes now turned on the powerful figure who had entered the room. The man who had just walked in was dressed sharply in a suit that radiated power, his posture straight, his gaze intense. No one had expected him. He was Eric Holt, the CEO of Global Tech Ventures, the investment firm that had been backing Daniel from the shadows. Arthur had seen Eric's name on some of the company's documents, but he hadn't realized just how closely linked he was to the entire conspiracy. Eric's eyes locked with Arthur's, cold and calculating. "I know what you're trying to do," Eric said, his voice smooth but heavy with authority. "You've played your little game, Arthur. But you've missed the bigger picture. This company is already ours." Arthur's pulse quickened, but he didn't let his fear show. "I don't think you understand," Arthur said, his voice steady. "This company isn't for sale. Not if it's going to be torn apart by greedy hands." Eric smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was a smile of someone who had already won. "You think this is just about the company? It's about power. We control this company now, and you're out of your depth. The investors are already on board. There's nothing you can do to stop this." Arthur's stomach twisted. Eric's confidence was unshakable. But Arthur wasn't going to back down. He had come too far. He had sacrificed too much to let this man, this investor, ruin everything. As the tension built, Arthur's mind raced. He had one chance left, one opportunity to turn the tables. The automation system he had created, the AI-driven technology that could save the company, was his weapon. But the question now was, could he prove it? Arthur turned to face the board, his voice quiet but full of determination. "You're right about one thing, Eric," he said. "This company is about power. But power doesn't lie in money or control. It lies in innovation. In the future." Eric raised an eyebrow, intrigued but dismissive. "And you think your little system can change that? Please." Arthur ignored the challenge in Eric's tone. Instead, he looked directly at the board members, those who had been so quick to listen to Daniel, those who had doubted his ideas. "I'll prove it," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I'll show you exactly what this system can do. Not in the future. Right now." The room was silent. Arthur had their attention now. He motioned to the screen, the same one that had once shown the results of his automation prototype. He wasn't just going to show them how it worked anymore, he was going to use it to save the company, right in front of their eyes. The clock was ticking. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one interrupted. Eric, though confident, remained silent, his gaze never leaving Arthur. It was clear, he wasn't going to let Arthur win without a fight. Arthur's fingers flew across the keyboard as he ran simulations. He knew this system inside and out. It was his creation, his baby. The AI-driven automation that he had built had been designed to solve problems that no one else could see, problems that had been buried under layers of corporate deceit. He ran a live test of the automation, and the numbers on the screen began to shift. Profits started to climb, production speed skyrocketed, and costs began to drop. The projections Arthur had shown in his initial presentation were now becoming a reality, in real time. The company was suddenly on the brink of a financial turnaround, and Arthur was in control of it. But Eric wasn't backing down. His eyes narrowed as he observed the results, his mind calculating his next move. He wasn't going to let this happen. Not while he still had his claws in the company. "You think you've won?" Eric sneered, stepping forward. "You think this little demonstration changes anything? This system isn't going to fix the bigger problems. We've already made our decision. The sale goes through, and your little AI isn't going to stop it." Arthur didn't flinch. He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "You're right. The system alone won't save this company. But you've overlooked one thing, a detail you didn't bother to investigate." Eric raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what's that?" Arthur pointed to the bottom of the screen. "The AI also tracks financial discrepancies. It's been analyzing every transaction, every deal, every accounting flaw, the ones you and Daniel thought you'd buried. And now, it's exposing them." The board gasped. Arthur had just turned the tables once again. The AI wasn't just a tool for production. It was a tool for justice. It had scanned through every financial record, uncovering the secret deals, the hidden debts, and the corruption that had been concealed under Eric's watch. It wasn't just about profits, it was about exposing the truth. The room fell silent as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Arthur had just uncovered the real reason Eric and Daniel had been so eager to sell the company off. It was never about saving Harrow Systems. It was about hiding their crimes, their financial manipulations, and their dirty deals. Eric's smug smile faltered as the evidence of his guilt flashed across the screen. The room, which had once been on his side, was now watching in stunned silence. The investors he had been courting were going to hear about this, and soon, the whole world would know. Arthur turned to the board. "This company can be saved," he said, his voice unwavering. "But not under Eric's leadership. He's been using this company as a pawn in his game of power." Eric opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed him. The truth had been exposed, and there was no escaping it. Arthur had done it. He had saved the company, not just with his engineering genius, but with his integrity. He had turned the tables, gone from underestimated engineer to the man who single-handedly dismantled the corruption that had almost destroyed Harrow Systems. The board stood up, their faces a mix of awe and gratitude. The real hero was clear. Arthur Walker had not only saved the company, but he had also restored its honor. He had taken the reins, and now, Harrow Systems was in capable hands. As Arthur stood there, the weight of everything he had endured finally lifted. The company was going to survive. The future was bright again, and this time, it was his vision leading the way. But just as the board began to celebrate, a final voice spoke from behind them. It was Daniel, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't over, Arthur." Arthur turned, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It is now." If you enjoyed this thrilling journey of an underestimated engineer who saved the day against all odds, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to get more heart-pounding, true-life stories. Don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts, and share the story with others who need a reminder that heroes often come from the most unexpected places. Stay tuned for more incredible stories like this one. The next twist could be just around the corner.